Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I'll just start with, hopefully, yeah. Just as a quick word of introduction, you will see there's a web link on that page which refers to the EPC's Digital Single Market Project, which is a project we carried out last year together with a number of partners, corporations, regions, countries, where we try to look ahead to see what kind of things are needing to be done at the European level to integrate the single market further in the digital area. And we made a number of recommendations, and I'll refer to those in my talk as well. But if you want more detail on any of this, then please feel free to look at the website. The outline of what I'm going to talk about. Firstly, I want to talk a bit about Europe's growth challenge. Of course, I'm aware, being an island, that you're very well aware of some of the challenges we are facing. But I think it is important to set the digital single market in the context of why are we so keen on pushing it forward at this point. Then I'll talk a bit about the future of the single market, how economies are changing in Europe and how the single market needs to adjust and what it then can actually achieve for the European economy. I will then talk about what needs to be done to achieve a true digital single market and where we are at the moment in the policy debate. In terms of the growth challenge, I think it's important to note that, firstly, this is not a problem which has just been caused by the economic crisis. We had problems with growth in Europe before the crisis. Ireland was actually one of the few exceptions in this, but if we're looking at growth rates across Europe, they tended to be relatively low, apart from the new member states, which were catching up to some extent. But in the big traditional economies, Germany, France, Italy, growth rates were relatively sluggish. That was caused by a number of different challenges, including globalization, which has increased competition for all of the major European countries. Competition for resources, which is global now, and we saw in 2007 prices were rising quite sharply for energy, for food, for commodities, and as I think we had to expect, the same is happening again. As we're coming out of the crisis, we're seeing exactly the same resource constraints, and that means prices are rising again. Climate change, we have had a very ambitious approach to climate change in Europe. Of all the major regions, probably the most ambitious approach. But that, of course, also costs money, both for adaptation and for the mitigation measures which we are talking about. And I think for me, the most important one, the demographic challenge. If we are looking even before the crisis for major countries such as Germany, the long-term growth rate was predicted to be around 1% because of demographic change. So a very major impact on our growth. The situation has, of course, been aggravated by the crisis. I think it is undoubtedly true that fiscal consolidation does dampen growth rates. I think fiscal consolidation is necessary, but it still has an impact on growth. We had structural long-term change, which has been accelerated by the crisis. So, for example, if we're looking at the contribution made by particular sectors to growth in the pre-crisis period, it's very unlikely to return if we look at construction or the financial sector, for example. We have a tremendously reduced ability of governments to invest in the future. The amounts of money we burned during the crisis are truly staggering. And what that means is we have both a reduced level of growth, a reduced level of GDP and a reduced potential growth rate for the future. And that will create a lot of problems. That's aggravated by increasing divergence, particularly within the Eurozone. The more successful economies are now getting relatively more successful within the Eurozone, whereas the weaker economies are getting much weaker, and that will create tremendous problems in the euro area. Having low growth, I think there's always a debate around, do we need a new growth model? I think it is undoubtedly true that we need sustainable growth for the future, but low growth or zero growth, in my view, does not work. If we're looking at labor markets, for example, in all countries it is true that you need a relatively high positive level of growth to have reductions in unemployment, increases in employment rates. You have the sustainability of Europe's economic and social model without, especially in light of demographic change, if we don't have more people paying into the system, which we won't have because of population changes, you need growth to generate the resources which are necessary, especially since we now have a very much sharply increased debt burden, which we also need to finance. So costs of financing of debt have gone up. Without growth, Europe's role in the world is also going to further diminish, and we will see a very big pressure on Eurozone cohesion. So let's turn to the single market for a bit. Yeah. So where do I see the single market in this? I think it's firstly important to say we have achieved a tremendous amount with the single market. It is, in my view, the key economic integration tool. If you like, it is at least in my view, it is the most important outcome of economic integration we have in the European Union. It has a very large potential to boost productivity, growth, and employment through the gains from increased economic integration, be it trade, be it investment. I think it has delivered a lot of that, but there are still a number of areas where the single market is incomplete. Turning to the four traditional freedoms of the single market for goods, services, capital, and people, I think on the goods side we pretty much have achieved a single market with the 1992 program. There are still some difficulties in terms of, for example, technical standards, but on the whole, goods move around very freely within the single market. On services, the situation has been more difficult. We had the Services Directive, which was a very painful process at the European level. We now have it in place, but there are still a number of areas which are exempted from the Services Directive, and we still need to see exactly how it will be implemented because it only just came into force. On capital, we also made some progress, but I think we still have to see what impact really particularly the financial crisis will have on the free movement of capital within the European Union. And free movement of people, I think in terms of the right to move, we have made tremendous progress. I think more needs to be done to also think about how we can encourage people more to move, to create a truly pan-European labor market, but that's something I think where more work will need to be done. So more needs to be done in pretty much all areas. I think we also need to deal more with the conflict we have, particularly the conflict around social Europe issues, the free movement of people clashing with provisions, social provisions within the member states, especially because there have been a number of court cases where this has been a particular issue. So these need to be resolved. But what I'm going to focus on today is really making the single market fit for the future. And that, for me, is the knowledge economy. And what I think I would argue very strongly is that the world, the economy in which we are living is changing, and we need to renew the single market to adapt to those changes. How is Europe's economy changing? I won't have time to go through all of the details, so in the interest of time, I will skip through quite a bit of the next two slides, but I'm happy to come back to that. But I think it is clear that the new technologies are permeating all of our economies now, that this is not about simply a sector of the economy. It is a transformational technology which will change the way we work across the whole economy. And that's, I think, the experience we have to see when we're looking at, for example, the US, where we have seen very large productivity increases in recent years driven by ICT. And that was not in the ICT sector, that was in the economy as a whole, and that's the important issue. I think it is also clear for me that if we're looking at where is Europe going, the only source of competitive advantage we will have in future is knowledge, is skills, is the intellectual economy, if you like, of which the digital economy is a large part. We do not have the resources, we don't have the population growth, we don't have the size of market, even though we are working on that. But I think what we can have is the knowledge and skills to continue to have the kind of lifestyles which we are used to. What we are also seeing is that business is changing. We're seeing a rise of e-commerce, we're seeing new business models working very differently than in the past. And I think what is emerging more and more clearly is that knowledge is becoming the most important factor of production. It is the key asset companies hold. Quite often it doesn't really matter anymore what organizational form a company takes. What matters is what is the knowledge it holds, what are the kind of intellectual property it can draw on. That means the single market must change. If we don't change it, the current rules will become increasingly irrelevant. I think given that we are talking about a digital economy increasingly, that means that it is not enough to just remove barriers. We need to actually be more proactive than that, and that means harmonizing provision across Europe. So, for example, it is not simply enough to allow people to do something. It is also the case that if people can electronically go onto a website anywhere in the European Union and buy something, we need to sort out how we deal with consumer protection, data protection, taxation of these goods. These are the kind of things which we need to deal with on a much more harmonized level. We need to get our head around knowledge as an asset, and that means we have to finally find European solutions for dealing with knowledge in terms of patents, in terms of IPR, which we haven't done for a long time. We have to focus much more on the non-material economy. It is not a gadget economy, which a lot of people think. It is about a transformational change of how economies work. And not just economies, it also is a transformational change of how society works. And I think that is part of the development. And we have to focus more and more on human capital. It is the most important area of competitive advantage we've got. So what can we gain if we do this? This is part of what we worked on in terms of the Digital Single Market project. I think firstly what we can achieve is to create a healthier ICT sector. What we have in Europe in terms of European companies at the moment is pretty much in the telecommunications sector, where we have some companies of scale, where we have companies which compete internationally. And that is because we have created, for example, a European mobile phone standard, which has enabled these companies to access the single market. We need to do the same thing on the internet economy so that we can also grow European companies of scale where we at the moment have none. But as I said before, this is not about the sector itself. What is far more important is the change, an uptake of technology, a renewal of our economic structures can bring across economies. And there, the digital single market provides opportunities to increase productivity, to increase innovation across Europe. And we estimate that it could at least add 4% to European GDP by 2020. That's very much a minimal figure from our estimates, but I think it is a very significant figure, especially in the context of the current economic difficulties. There are wider benefits of the digital single market as well. It can make labor markets more efficient. It can help to deal with some of the longer-term problems, climate change, demographics, for example. And I think what is also very important is that citizens, especially younger citizens, increasingly expect that there is a digital single market. It is becoming very difficult to explain to people why we live in a European Union with a single market where you cannot download music across borders, for example. It is not comprehensible to a lot of young people. For a lot of young people, it just simply means the digital single market does not exist in the areas they care about. And that is something we need to address because I think it goes to the heart of the European project. The recommendations we made a number of detailed recommendations, and as I said on the website, you can have a look at some of those details, but we grouped them into 5 broad areas. Firstly, we said that at the European level, there needs to be a lot more political emphasis on the single market. It needs to be pushed forward at the highest level. And there needs to be a real drive behind it, not dissimilar to the 1992 program where we achieved the single market for goods. Second area we focused on was an online marketplace for consumers where they can trust the system. That means, for example, improvements in consumer protection, but also dealing much more effectively on a pan-European level with abuses of the online marketplace, be it cybercrime, etc. We need to update the business environment. So, for example, at the moment, e-signatures, which are absolutely essential for businesses to work across borders. We have, in essence, 27 different systems, which are not necessarily mutually compatible. Those are the kind of things where we need at least a system whereby the different national systems can talk to each other, if not a harmonized system. Same applies in a number of different areas as well, be it e-invoicing or be it in terms of taxation systems, where we still have huge differences across Europe. We already talked a bit about the legal framework for knowledge assets. I think we desperately need a European patent. We've been talking about it for 25 years. It is now time to actually deliver that. But also we need to deal with IPR issues, licensing issues, the kind of issues we just have in a knowledge society. And we also have to invest more in building the foundations and the infrastructure for the digital single market. That means both on the hard side and on the soft side. So that includes, for example, next generation broadband, but it also means we have to invest more in e-skills, in the kind of skills people need to take part in the digital world. What has happened over the last year or so? We have had the high-level leadership in the sense that the digital single market was picked up in Europe 2020. It was picked up by Commission President Barroso as one of the key priorities for the current Commission. And we've had, in my view, one of the best reports which has been produced at the European level for a long time, the Monti report, where former Commissioner Mario Monti has produced a report which goes across all the different areas of the single market, including the digital single market, but it's broader than the digital single market. At the Commission level, we now have had a number of different agendas which have been put on the table. The three most important ones, I would say, are Digital Europe, which came a little bit earlier, and then the Citizenship Report and the Single Market Act, which were just put out a couple of months ago. The Single Market Act is, at this stage, a consultation document, so it is out for people's comments. The idea of the Commission is that it will be revised and then that there will be broad buy-in from Commission, Council, Parliament, and we will see an accelerated implementation over the next couple of years. And these different agendas together contain a lot of the things which we think are important: consumer protection, IPR, broadband, etc. So, will the current proposals deliver? I think with the political priority we started on the right foot, but I think there's a big danger of having priority for these kind of longer-term structural changes lost in the crisis which we are in. At the moment, it is still moving, but the question is, when it comes to the really difficult issues, will there be the political will to push things forward when it becomes difficult? I think I still have some question marks about the degree of ambition. Are we really seeing an overarching vision which talks about a fully integrated digital single market, or are we talking about a more piecemeal approach of making progress in certain areas? I think the piecemeal approach is very dangerous because I don't see it as delivering a digital single market. I think we need to make progress across a number of different areas simultaneously to get a digital single market. And that I think is something we still need to see. Will we actually see an ambitious legislative and non-legislative program which gets delivered in the near future? There is a continuing risk of fragmentation, different agendas being taken forward by different commissioners that can lead to situations where there are contradictions, where there is a lack of momentum because different people are doing different things. At the moment, they seem to be pulling it together, but let's see how long that lasts. In a number of areas, they are the right policies we're debating, but it's still a lack of details. It says in a lot of areas we need to make progress on, but it doesn't actually say what does that progress look like. And in that context, I would say, do we really need more consultation on some of these issues? We've talked about a lot of these issues for years. Maybe there are one or two issues where more consultation could be useful, but I would argue for the vast bulk of the proposals, we should have just moved to action rather than more consultation. But let's see whether we are where we are. Let's see whether the consultation does move into action very soon. I think there is a risk of non-delivery, and it is relatively high, particularly in the current climate. But I think delivery is absolutely necessary to achieve the smart growth, which we also set as an objective in the Europe 2020 strategy. I think without decisive action, without actually making progress, we are facing a lost decade in Europe, and I think it is not a time when we can afford to have that. And I also think that we are increasingly in danger of having a single market which loses relevance for the next generation, and that I think will have a big impact on the European project as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.